The man who wouldn't stop praying, inspired by the life of John Hyde, a man so committed to prayer that the floor beneath him wore the mark of his devotion. A man who, while others stood in pulpits or platforms, spent his nights alone, weeping for souls. He didn't preach to crowds. He didn't lead revivals. But revival followed him because he lived with his knees on the ground and his heart fixed on eternity. This is the story of a missionary few people know, but one whose life altered the course of nations. His name was John Hyde, and by the time you're done hearing his story, you'll never think of prayer the same way again. You might think one person can't make a difference, but what if all it takes to shift history is a single man on his knees? It happened over 100 years ago in the dusty plains of northern India. John Hyde wasn't famous. He didn't possess great charisma or deliver captivating sermons, but he knew something most of us forget: how to truly touch heaven. John would often pray not just for minutes, but for hours, sometimes entire nights would pass while he poured out his soul to God. He didn't pray casually. He prayed as if lives depended on it because he believed they did. He became known not for his voice in public, but for his silence in private. A silence filled with passion, with tears, with cries for a move of God. But who was he? Born in 1865, in Illinois, USA, John Hyde was raised in a Christian home. His father was a Presbyterian minister, and young John grew up surrounded by the rhythms of church life. He was quiet, introspective, and had no signs of becoming a powerful evangelist. In fact, speaking in public was one of his greatest weaknesses yet. While in seminary, John began to feel a call to missions burning deep within. And despite his personality, despite his struggles with communication, despite warnings from others, he made a decision. He would serve God in India. He landed in Punjab, a region spiritually hardened and resistant to the gospel. The churches there were small, cold, and dry. People were disinterested. Converts were few. To make matters worse, John battled physical sicknesses, fevers, exhaustion, and a body unprepared for India's harsh climate. And yet, instead of retreating, he pressed in. Unable to speak well, John turned to what he could do: pray. At first, he prayed for an hour or two each day, but it wasn't long before that stretched to 4, then 6. Eventually, some days were spent almost entirely in prayer, and these weren't formulaic prayers. These were desperate, tear-filled intercessions. He wept for souls as if they were his own family. He prayed through the night while others slept. He fasted, groaned, and sometimes stayed in his room for days, crying out for a move of God. It was said that walking past his door, people felt the atmosphere change. Some wept without knowing why. Others described hearing him whispering and sobbing, overwhelmed by a burden they couldn't explain. And then, something began to shift. Churches that had been empty began to fill. Villages that were spiritually dry started responding to the gospel. The atmosphere in the region changed. People began surrendering to Christ, often without hearing a single sermon. Revival broke out not because of programs, not because of strategy, but because of a man who refused to stop praying. While pastors planned events, John slipped away quietly to intercede. He didn't seek the spotlight. In fact, most of his life was spent in small, hidden places. Yet it was there in secret that he fought battles and won victories that transformed a nation. One of the most powerful moments in his ministry came during the famous annual gatherings in Akat. While others met to discuss plans and share messages, John would retreat into prayer, lifting up each pastor, each message, each soul by name. He would sometimes pray for hundreds of people in a single day, individually, intentionally, passionately. Eyewitnesses recall hearing his groans from down the hall. They saw his frail body shaking from days without rest. His tears left marks on the floor. His voice was hoarse from crying out one phrase over and over: "Lord, give me souls or take my life." And God answered. The meetings were marked by supernatural power, healings, mass baptisms. Entire churches came alive. The gospel spread like wildfire across the region. John never built a stage or led a crusade. He built altars in private tent. The fire of heaven fell. Even now, more than a century later, believers in India still talk about the man who knelt when others stood, the man who prayed when others preached. John Hyde's life teaches us this. You don't need a microphone to change the world. You just need to know how to kneel. He left us a model that is both radical and simple. Prayer is not a formality. It's not a spiritual routine. It is the engine of revival, the secret to power, the doorway to heaven's intervention on earth. And here's the challenge. What if you prayed like that? What if your generation prayed like that? Not out of guilt, not to be seen, but with genuine hunger for lost souls, for your family, for your church, for your community. What if we stopped relying on noise and started relying on God? John Hyde's story proves this truth beyond question. A prayerless life is a powerless life. So now it's your turn. Close the door. Turn off the distractions. Get on your knees. And don't stop. Revival may not start in a stadium. It may start in your room when you whisper, "God, I'm here."